compression rate of 100 to 120, 2 inches deep, no leaning, and checked in end-tidal CO2. That's sort of state-of-the-art of cardiac arrest care right now. But the question I'd ask you, and I think we'll see this change clinically over the next 10 years or so, is could we do a different strategy? And with that strategy, could we either get return of spontaneous circulation sooner, or would she be less injured when she got return of spontaneous circulation? So would we have better flow during those 20 minutes it took to get return of spontaneous circulation, or might she get that in 10 minutes or something if we took a different approach to this? So what could that different approach be? How could we personalize her CPR, and could we guide the CPR by physiology? So here's a really cool study from some of my colleagues at CHOP when I was at Penn, and these are a lot of the people who were in the Center for Resuscitation Science that we had there. So they did a randomized controlled trial, a swine model of cardiac arrest, and they do 7 minutes of asphyxia in pigs, and then they induce VF. And they do CPR for 10 minutes before they shock the patient. And the chest compression rate's 100, the ventilation rate's 6 with 100% FiO2, and then they randomize them to 2 groups. One is blood pressure targeted, so these are animals that have an A line in, they have lots of other hemodynamic monitoring equipment. And in the blood pressure targeted group, they're not going to do the CPR in any specific fashion. They're going to do it to these targets, which is a systolic blood pressure of 100 millimeters of mercury, and they use the chest compression depth to achieve that this systolic blood pressure, and then a coronary perfusion pressure of at least 20. And they do that with epinephrine and vasopressin. And the reason they choose 20 is that in swine models of cardiac arrest, and this is probably true in humans too, if your coronary perfusion pressure is under 20, then defibrillation doesn't work. If your coronary perfusion pressure is over 20, it's much more likely that you'll convert VF into a perfusible rhythm. The other group they randomize them to is just AHA guidelines, so a depth of 51 like the woman got, and epinephrine every 3 to 5 minutes, so Q4 minutes, like the woman got in our study. So the question is, could she have done better if she got this blood pressure targeted resuscitation? Now this is hard to do in the pre-hospital setting. You can't ask your medics to put an A line in, but perhaps one of the things that can be done as soon as a patient gets to an emergency department, if you have the resources in the right setting, is that someone puts an A line in. And then you use that to guide your resuscitation. And then in hospital arrest, especially ones that happen in an ICU, there might be an A line in already that we can use. So looking at this graphically, you can see the 10 minutes until first defibrillation. And the bottom curve, you start to see the coronary perfusion pressure. The bottom curve is the coronary perfusion pressure using the AHA approach, just the way any medic would do it. The top curve is the blood pressure targeted group. So when VFib's induced, then in the AHA guidelines group, they get the epi every 4 minutes, and then they'll defibrillate it at 10 minutes. In the blood pressure targeted group, they're doing deeper chest compressions if they need them, and then they're giving epi more often to push the coronary perfusion pressure up, adding vasopressin. And so you can see in this particular pig, they're giving more doses of the medicines before they defibrillate the patient. And what did this turn into? What it showed was that you could drive the coronary perfusion pressure above this threshold of 15 or 20 much more easily using this targeted approach. And this is what they found in their randomized trial. They only got return of spontaneous circulation using the AHA approach in 30% of the animals. They got it in 100% using the blood pressure targeted approach. And that translated into better success with survival and neurologic outcomes over 24 hours of ICU care in these animals. So it suggests in this very small trial that we shouldn't just do a certain way of doing things, but we should do it to physiology. And that makes sense with many other things we do in medicine. We don't just say everyone gets X. We say you get this amount if you weigh this amount, or you get this amount for this infection, or you get that for that infection. And so maybe we have to personalize CPR like that. And what's interesting is that the blood pressure group, as we saw in that graph, got more vasopressors before the first defibrillation, but they got fewer total vasopressor doses. So they raised the coronary perfusion pressure and then they stopped doing that except when the animal needed it. And some required no vasopressors at all. And this is a really important point. If we're giving epi to a person who doesn't need the epi before we defibrillate them, maybe we're making it less likely that the defibrillation will work. So this is all stuff we can start thinking about. They just published a pediatric inpatient trial where they used the same strategy and showed better outcomes in the physiology-guided group. And this is in kids who had an A-line in at the time of their cardiac arrest. And interestingly, the one physiologic target that we can measure easily, Untitled CO2, they saw no difference in that. So coronary perfusion's a better predictor for these. So that's something to just think about, and the animal model makes physiologic sense, and this may be the future of CPR, and we may be personalizing intra-arrest care, and now I'll tell you a little bit about how maybe we can personalize post-arrest care. So why would this work? What would be happening when you do this? When you have a cardiac arrest, your ATP, if you measure ATP in animals during a cardiac arrest with just chest compressions, the ATP just degrades rapidly over time. With oxygen delivery and coronary perfusion pressure, you can restore the ATP. And so you can really not defibrillate an animal when there's no ATP present to change the electrical conduction. So as this ATP breaks down, then we do really good chest compressions guided to physiology, give drugs guided to physiology. We can reconstitute the ATP, and with that, you can shock the animal back into a perfusing rhythm. So you get return of spontaneous circulation, and then you have a lot of resuscitation opportunities. And regardless of, some people say, oh, they don't need temperature management, or I don't care what their blood pressure is. You're doing all those things whether you have a protocol to treat them or not. You're making a decision about sending someone to the cath lab if you don't send them. That's a decision. I made a decision not to send the person to the cath lab if you don't send them to the cath lab, right? There's no decisions with what you should do post-arrest that you don't make, even if you just choose the path of least resistance, which is the I'm not going to do that approach. So you need to think about what am I doing in these patients. This is the 2010 guideline for what EMS should do after they get return of spontaneous circulation. We don't think about this, and a lot of EMS doesn't think about this the way they do. They get return of spontaneous circulation, they just bring the person to the ER. In the emergency department, often when we get return of spontaneous circulation, everyone goes like this and says our job's done, but actually our job's just starting, because now we have a live patient that we need to salvage. So what they say you should do is 10 to 12 breaths a minute, shoot for an end-tidal CO2 of 35 to 40. If the systolic blood pressure is less than 90, give fluids and vasopressors. If they're neurologically injured, either start TTM in the pre-hospital setting. That's sort of gone away because some of the trials on intravenous saline, but start that in the ED. If they're STEMI or high suspicion for a coronary cause, take them to a PCI center, and then advanced critical care. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So post-cardiac arrest syndrome. So we can think about what we're talking about here. This is just a schematic to think about what happens to someone who has a cardiac arrest. We published this in a review that was in Chest back in 2014. And a lot of this is from animal work that some colleagues of mine did in a mouse model of cardiac arrest, looking at hippocampal ischemia and reperfusion. But there's 3 different phases of injury that we need to think about and that we can potentially treat. And each of them has a different therapeutic window. And these windows also vary depending upon the quality of CPR we do, the kind of arrest it is, the protoplasm of the patient, what their comorbidities are, and things like that. So thinking about this, if you're over on the left, when the patient has an arrest, there's intra-arrest injury. So that's ischemia, right? Ischemia is no blood flow. We modify ischemia by doing chest compressions. And during that time, you get a rapid onset of pathology that includes ischemic depolarization of heart cells, excitotoxicity, and an influx of calcium into the cells. And that goes on until there's return of spontaneous circulation. And that's a very hard phase to treat, right, to modulate that. We can modulate it with chest compressions. There's been some studies on intra-arrest ischemia, right? And intra-arrest hypothermia, so trying to cool patients down during an arrest. And it's really important to think about that, because if we could actually do that, that would improve outcomes. So there's been really interesting work on perfusing organs before they get transplanted. And if you make the organs hypothermic before you harvest them from the patient, there's much less post-transplant delay of renal function and things like that. So by getting them cold before you harvest them, you're protecting those organs. We could do the same thing in humans, but it's very hard to do this technically. So the second mechanism of injury is early reperfusion. So reperfusion is the restoration of blood flow. And that's essential to life, but it also produces further injury. So a lot of what's been caused by ischemia is amplified by reperfusion. And early reperfusion in animal models only lasts for about 20 minutes or so. And you get mitochondrial calcium overload, you get production of reactive oxygen species, a lot of changes in the mitochondria that lead to mitochondrial death, and then you get signaling for cell death. And so if we could treat this reperfusion injury immediately when there's return of spontaneous circulation, we might prevent a lot of injuries. But that's still only 20 minutes, and a lot of that's in the pre-hospital setting, so it's hard to treat. So what we're really treating is this secondary injury, secondary reperfusion injury that starts about 4 hours after return of spontaneous circulation and goes on for days. So this is really the target of hypothermia. But maybe that first 20 minutes can be treated if we manage the blood pressure correctly, or if we do other things to the patient, if we manage the oxygen delivery correctly. This process is interesting because a lot of this is driven by an inflammatory cascade that's very similar to sepsis. And if you measure the classic inflammatory markers of sepsis in post-arrest patients, you'll see that they're very similar in these patients. And that's another potential strategy that we can use to manage these patients. So to think about this, there's really two organs that are primarily injured. Ischemia and reperfusion is a whole body problem, but the two things that are most detrimental to the patients are brain injury and cardiac injury. And so you can graph this out and start to think about patients with minor brain injury and minor cardiac injury, patients with more severe brain injury or more severe cardiac injury, or the worst patients who have everything. And then there's also this group that have a cardiac arrest, get chest compressions, usually get defibrillated, and then have no or minimal injury. So those would be patients that get 1 or 2 defibrillations and then have return of spontaneous circulation. By the time they come into the ED, they may be saying, what happened, or, you know, am I gonna live, or they may be agitated, but they're able to answer questions. And those are the patients that most likely just need to go to the cath lab and get the cause of their arrest treated. So let's just look at some of these a little bit and think about them. So the patients who really were treated in the hypothermia trials that did well were this first category, patients with minor cerebral and minor cardiac injury. And in the first trials that were in New England Journal in 2002, they actually excluded people with cardiogenic shock and things like that. So you were getting at people that were neurologically injured, maybe some cardiac injury, but treatable. And that's what these first 2 trials did. So 2002 New England Journal, this trial is 78 patients. It was Stephen Bernard over in Australia. And they basically took out of hospital ventricular fibrillation that had return of spontaneous circulation. And they said, the EMS said, are they neurologically injured? So that tells you what kind of time frame this was, a very short time frame decision to decide that they're gonna get the therapy. 5 or 10 minutes of, did they wake up and say, what the heck happened to me, or are they not responding to commands? And if they weren't responding to commands, they, on odd days, started treating them with hypothermia in the pre-hospital setting, just using the kind of cooling pads that you, cooling bags that you use from sprained ankle, or on even days they just transport them into the hospital. And they did 12 hours of hypothermia to 33 degrees and showed significant improvement in neurologic outcome with that strategy. 49% good outcomes versus 25%. The second trial was in Europe. It was a multi-center trial. It was a true randomized trial where they brought post-arrest patients after a VF arrest with return of spontaneous circulation to the ED. And then if they were neurologically injured, not following commands, they randomized them to hypothermia at 32 to 34 degrees for 24 hours versus normal thermia. And they showed a significant improvement in both neurologic outcomes and survival in this trial, which was larger with 274 patients. And neurologic outcomes were improved from 55% to 59% good outcomes using hypothermia. So those were the two studies that led this to become recommended by the AHA and the International Liaison Committee on Resuscitation, and led to lots of different programs around the country and around the world being developed for temperature management and post-arrest care in comatose patients. So it was all pretty simple until this trial came out. This is from Nicholas Nielsen and Hans Friedberg over in Europe. Most of the patients in this trial were in Europe, but also in Australia. And they compared two active temperature management strategies. One was 33 degrees and one was 36 degrees. So there's no normal thermia in this. There's very low end of normal thermia if you consider 36 as the cutoff for the SIRS criteria. But it's really two levels of mild hypothermia heading toward sort of moderate hypothermia. And these patients were all comatose afterwards. It was 980 something patients, and they were randomized to 33 versus 36 degrees. They also had a very aggressive strategy to manage these patients for 5 days minimum after cardiac arrest. They had hemodynamic goals, monitoring goals, and there was very little neuroprognostication that was done until until 5 days after cardiac arrest. And the interesting thing is they showed no difference in outcomes between these two temperatures. But these are two active temperature management strategies. About 80% of these patients are VF, 80% of them are witnessed, 80% of them got bystander CPR, but they're neurologically injured with a 25 minutes average length of time from collapse to return of spontaneous circulation. And these are those best patients. They fall into those minimal cerebral and minimal to moderate cardiac injury. 40% of them were having STEMIs, so a significant percentage of these patients went to the cath lab. So the next trial that is going to be done is TTM2, and that's going to try and address some of these questions of is it just temperature management preventing fever, or is it actually the hypothermia that's treating these patients? The other future directions are going to probably be different target temperatures for different patients, different lengths of time that people are kept at hypothermia, with actual objective ways to decide if it's time to rewarm them or if we should continue on with hypothermia, and objective ways to stop the therapy. So what TTM2 is going to do, it's starting later this year. The hypothesis is it hypothermia at 33 degrees, or is it just prevention of fever? And it just received its funding through this Swedish medical organization and some European funding. And it's going to be international with probably about 8 US sites, and they're going to compare 33 degrees to 37.6. So what they'll do is actively cool patients in the 33 arm to 33 degrees. In the 37.6 arm, they won't do any temperature management until they hit 37.6, and then they'll use either surface or intravascular cooling to lock them in at 37.6. The concern many of us have is that 37.6 will become 38.5 before they get them under control. So the non-fever group will actually get exposed to some fever. They're going to use the same 5-day aggressive ICU bundle of care before you can prognosticate. And then the first paper will be published when there's 6-month outcomes. And then they're going to keep on following the patients to 24 months for survival and pretty sophisticated neurocognitive outcomes. So The plan is to start enrolling in September of 2017. It's going to be 2,000 patients, so it's going to be the largest post-arrest trial that's ever done. So that will be an interesting trial to see what comes of that. So moving into these sicker patients with either severe cardiac injury or severe cerebral injury, we have to think about other things that we need to manage in these patients and other strategies. And I'll just show you a couple things that we've done some work on. So when we started our post-arrest program at Penn in 2005, we built a protocol that was done in the emergency department where we started the temperature management, and we did sort of aggressive goal-directed resuscitation in these patients. And this was a paper we published in Resuscitation in 2009, just reporting on the first 18 patients. And we put an A-line in all these patients in a continuous SCVO2 catheter. The average time to catheter was about 30 minutes after return of spontaneous circulation. The average time to an A-line was about 15 minutes after return of spontaneous circulation. And what you can see is that a fair number of people are at their hemodynamic goals at that point in time, and they aren't at their temperature management goals, as you would expect. And then with fluid boluses, vasoactive medications, inotropes, while we're giving them chilled saline and cooling racks to cool them down, we were able to get the majority of these patients to their hemodynamic and temperature goals over that time. This modified very quickly. We started doing most of this as an ultrasound-driven protocol and using the fluid in a different way and trying to figure out who was fluid responsive and who wasn't. But the point is still the same, paying attention to the hemodynamics and resuscitating these patients from the first minutes after return of spontaneous circulation. What we saw was that way more patients had myocardial dysfunction and needed vasoactive medications that were inotropes to increase their contractility than we were using historically, and this has been reported from other centers as well. And that these patients, especially over time, developed this sepsis-like syndrome, needed more fluid than we had given them historically, and all of this bundle of care, along with the hypothermia, translated into better outcomes in these patients. What about mean arterial pressure, right? Your patient post-arrest, their MAP is 55, is that okay, or should I actively change it? Should I drive the pressure up? What pressure should we have? You know, the guidelines have always said, oh, maintain a pressure greater than 65, and then they cite some sepsis reference, right? What does that have to do with what happened to someone post-arrest and stuff? And thinking about this, thinking about cerebral blood flow and mean arterial pressure, we all learn in medical school or nursing school about the curve of maintenance of cerebral blood flow over a large range of mean arterial pressure, right? Cerebral autoregulation. And what a lot of people thought is that post-arrest that it's absent. But then there's been some really interesting research that's been done that shows that it may be absent in some patients, may be right-shifted in other patients. But the implication of all that is that this range of 65 probably gives you an inadequate cerebral perfusion pressure. So maybe we have to actually shoot for a higher MAP. There's an animal study that Peter Saffer did where the dogs had a much better neurologic outcome when they got a bundle of post-arrest care that included driving their MAPs up to 120. And I'm not suggesting we should do that in humans, but it makes you think about how should we manage these patients and what should we choose for our hemodynamic goal. So we studied this in 170 patients. This was one of my medical students' scholarly pursuits at Penn. And we published this in ICM a couple years ago, and you can see that the mean arterial pressure, the top blue curve is survivors, the bottom curve is non-survivors. And even from the first MAP that's recorded post-return of spontaneous circulation, the survivors have a higher mean arterial pressure. And then we're maintaining that pressure out over time, and it's statistically significantly different over time. That doesn't tell us that we should pursue these pressures necessarily, but it does tell us we need to think about the pressures, and then it leads to hypotheses about how you could do a trial of a MAP of 65 versus 85 in these patients, and would that make a difference? And what's interesting is we're talking about these different quadrants of patients. If you look at this, the top curve is patients who expired but were on no vasopressors, and then underneath that is patients who were alive and had no vasopressors. So you have start to see these different groups of people. So someone who survives and requires no vasopressors, but their mean arterial pressure is higher. That's someone who probably has some neurologic injury, but not much cardiac injury. The people who die but don't need vasopressors are more neurologically injured, but they're not requiring vasopressors, they don't need inotropes. And then you can see the converse of that. Patients who survive, are neurologically injured, require vasopressors, and they survive fine. And then this group of patients who aren't as neurologically injured, but require a lot of vasopressors, die, and those may be patients who need a different strategy, like going on to ECMO when they're in shock, instead of just trying to manage them through this shock and then dying of refractory shock. So you start to see these patients break into different groups that probably need a different post-arrest resuscitation strategy. So future directions to this might be things like more non-invasive monitoring, ways to integrate this real-time data integration so we can get better measures of flow, a real analysis of oxygen, things like continuous lactate measures, and then perhaps a trial of early MAP goals, because maybe a lot of the injury to the brain that people don't recover from is just those short periods of time of hypoperfusion after return of spontaneous circulation. And we see those people, unfortunately, still frequently at Jefferson, where someone comes in, they get return of spontaneous circulation, they don't get that much attention paid to them, and then someone says, hey, their pressure's 70 over 40. And that was something we avoided a lot more at Penn, because we just put someone at the bedside and stayed with them for a couple hours after they had returned of spontaneous circulation, watched them much more closely, and avoid these periods of hypoperfusion. So then you can move into this group of severe cerebral and severe cardiac injury. Those are patients we don't know that well how to manage these days. But one of the things we do know is a lot of people are thrown into that category before we're really prognosticated on them. And so we need to take some time. The TTM trial, they took 5 days before they really did their neuroprognostication. And that's something that everyone who's doing post-arrest care should think about. When do I start saying I'm going to stop taking care of this patient, or when do I think I should press on, and what signals do I use in that patient? So this is something we published with Ann Grossestroer, who's an epidemiologist up at Israel in Boston now. And we took just 200 patients from our post-arrest registry, and we looked at when did they wake up after cardiac arrest. And the average time to waking up was 3.2 days. So that's get induced with hypothermia, cooled for 24 hours, rewarmed, and about a day later you're awake. That's an optimal patient. We were talking earlier at lunch in the National Registry of Cardiopulmonary Resuscitation, which is get with the guidelines now. When they published their first paper, the average time in in-hospital arrest to withdrawal of care was 1.5 days. So that's way over here on this curve, right? And then if you go over to where the TTM trial was, you start to see more patients that have gotten return of spontaneous circulation. But what about these patients? This is a group of patients that we see more and more of, that if you press on with high quality ICU care, people wake up at day 6, 7, 8, and then there's this person out here, and we've had many more of those since we published this paper, who was in a coma for 14 days. On this person, we actually had a family meeting on Friday because we didn't think, we had no signals that this person was going to wake up. He had a pretty miserable looking MRI. We had a family meeting on Friday. The family was very religious. They said, we want to go to church on Sunday. And we'll come back in on Monday and talk to you. The guy woke up Monday morning and was extubated Monday evening, and went home neurologically intact about 7 days after that. So that was really something that woke us up a little bit. And I'm not suggesting that every person should get 2 weeks of aggressive ICU care, because I don't think that's reasonable. But what you want to think about is, where does the curve start to level off? And it doesn't level off at 3 days or 4 days. So you have to think about the balance between cost and benefits. And if every center in America actually salvaged 95 or 96% of the patients, that would be great. But what most places are doing is stopping back when they haven't even salvaged 30 or 40% of the patients. And that's what curves like this suggest to you, is that we need longer care, more meticulous care, and more people will wake up during that time. So future directions with this will be maybe a multimodal approach, a multi-temporal approach, where we're able to measure more things at more points in time. Other ways to early prognosticate, there's been some interesting studies on regional oxygen saturation, intra-arrest, that suggests that that may be something that we can use. And then some kind of score that combines things like CT scan, EEG, neuromarkers like neuron-specific enolase, how much shivering they're doing, things like that. Put that all together into a score that can tell you whether the patient needs more therapy and what the chances are that person will recover from therapy. And then maybe a hyper-aggressive approach for patients with severe injury. So there's really interesting sort of, esoteric animal studies where with certain amounts of brain injury, if they give them things that are very toxic to the body, like cyanide or hydrogen sulfide, and put them in a coma and then use those drugs and then use those to shut down the mitochondria and then turn things back on in a systematic fashion, that you can recover animals that have significant injury. And you can also recover them when you give them certain perfusion cocktails after significant neurologic injury. So those are things we can think about. How could we do some hyper-aggressive strategy like that? Could we put people into a pentobarbital coma for an extended period of time and then recover them from that? And that's all stuff that is either never going to happen or is for down the road from here. So looking at this case in a different fashion, unfortunately the outcome I showed you is not what happened to this woman. So she comes in, it's the same case, and she gets the same therapy from them, and then she shows up in the emergency department, and she's brought to us, and we do ongoing ACLS. In 44 minutes after she arrives in the ED, she's been shocked 12 times. She's gotten epinephrine times 10, vasopressin, and an amiodarone drip. So she's 59 minutes into her cardiac arrest, and this is what the monitor actually showed at that point. This is the way the case played out. She's got an end title of 32, and she's still in VF 59 minutes after she arrived. So what do we do then, right? What's our strategy with this patient at that point in time? We can go on and on like this, but survival and neurologic function decrease with the length that we do CPR. But paradoxically, the longer we do CPR, the more survivors we get. So there's been good study that Goldberger did that was in Lancet, where they used the Get With The Guidelines registry, and what they showed was that hospitals that have a longer average time of CPR have more survivors. And so is that willingness to press on, getting more patients to treat? Yes. Is it also a marker for better CPR and for better post-arrest care? Yes. So it all feeds into itself. But you do get into this vicious cycle where you get into this metabolic phase after cardiac arrest. You get a ton of lactate production, acidosis, and that leads to further low cardiac output, further ischemia, more refractory VF, a harder person to shock out, harder person to get enough coronary perfusion pressure to defibrillate them, and less likelihood of getting sustained return of spontaneous circulation, suggesting we need a different strategy in these patients. This would also suggest that this is a paper that we published in Circulation last year, and this is using the All Japan registry. So in Japan, every cardiac arrest, EMS has to enter it by law into a database within 24 hours of the cardiac arrest. So all of it gets loaded into a database. They know within a dozen arrests each year how many arrests there were in Japan and where they went and what happened to them. But what you see here is you're looking at 30-day neurologic and favorable neurologic outcomes in these patients. And the white bars are return of spontaneous circulation before hospital arrival. The black bars are after hospital arrival with good neurologic outcome. And you can see that you have to go out to 40 minutes or so, 40 to 45 minutes, depending upon the rhythm, to get 99% of your neurologically intact survivors. What we also see is a rapid drop-off somewhere around 20 minutes. And what this suggests is that maybe 15 minutes to 20 minutes of conventional CPR is the cutoff for where we should be thinking about alternate strategies in someone like this woman. And what other strategies could we do? So what could we do for her? It's been 60 minutes, we could continue conventional CPR. It hasn't worked, right? Einstein said insanity is doing the same thing that doesn't work over and over again, right? So should we just do this? In this case, what actually happened is I'm also the attending for the trauma bay, and we get a trauma code coming in, and you have to say, we've tried for an hour in an emergency department that's all backed up, and we're gonna move on to the trauma code at this point, because we can't get it back. But it's really hard to call a code when someone's end-tidal CO2 is 32 and they're still in VF. So we could put her on a mechanical chest compression device like a Lucas, send her to the cath lab and see if when they open a vessel, if there's a blockage, then she'll get return of spontaneous circulation. Or we didn't at that point in time have our ECMO program, extracorporeal CPR, but we could put her on ECMO, and then that gives you some time to salvage this patient. But what we did was we terminated the resuscitation, so we called the code, and that's basically pronouncing someone dead. So if we were gonna use mechanical CPR as a bridge, what you do is you do 5 to 15 minutes of conventional CPR, switch to either a Lucas or an auto pulse, and then go to the cath lab or go on to ECMO at that point in time. And this is able to be done. This is from a case series in an experimental study that was in JACC back in 2007. And they're basically showing on a mannequin how to shoot the cath pictures with the Lucas device running. So you just have to use different angles where you can get adequate pictures. And then they reported 2 patients that they took to the cath lab on Lucas. And then they also reported 5 pigs that they did a VF model in, and VF and coronary occlusion model, and then showed that they could use the Lucas device on a pig while they were opening the vessel in those animals. And this has become an approach that's used in Europe a lot. So we terminated the resuscitation attempts. We would pronounce her dead, and just philosophically, what is dead at that point in time? Is she dead? Are her cells dead? Are her mitochondria dead? I would argue that her mitochondria are completely salvageable. Many of her cells are, and if we could salvage them in reverse order, we could salvage the patient as well. We just don't have the strategy for that at this point in time. So with no return of spontaneous circulation, we called her code at 63 minutes. And what we're trying to do here is manipulate these curves. So the bottom curve is what happens, rapid decline in survival as cardiac arrest goes on, exactly what I'm showing you in that curve from the Nagel paper. And then a lot of people die after return of spontaneous circulation. With post-arrest care, we're able to manipulate that post-ROSC period. But what we really want to do is have a way to know who to pull out of here early and use alternate strategies and get more survival. So the alternate strategies would be early extracorporeal CPR, immediate PCI, and then a different bundle of post-cardiac arrest care. So looking at her, why is she a good candidate for this? Well, she had good health prior to her arrest. It's a witnessed arrest. She gets immediate CPR, so she has less ischemic injury. She has a shockable rhythm, so it's probably something we can find a cause of in reverse. She gets high quality CPR. She has a short transport time. So if we're going to put her on ECMO in the ED, we wouldn't have 40 minutes of cardiac arrest, we'd have 15 minutes. And then she's still showing signs of gas exchange. So this is your optimal patient to stick on ECMO. This is from a course we ran over in Sendai, Japan last year, where we go to Japanese Circulation Society meeting each year, and then we do an ECMO training course. And this is a device called the Endo system that was invented by Dr. Endo over in Japan. And it's made from stuff from Home Depot. It costs less than $20 a patient to build one of these devices. and you can really learn how to cannulate. And now we've started doing them with ultrasound guidance over artificial skin and stuff, and it's very realistic. You can actually pitch this up to like a McKay cardio help and do circulation and see how many bubbles you got in, and it's a very good simulation system. Very old ECMO equipment on the left there that's out of date now. But the goal of this is basically to take blood out of the venous side, oxygenate it, filter it, pump it back into the patient on the arterial side, and use this to replace the heart and lung until you can reverse the cause of arrest. And in expert hands, this can be done quickly, and it can be a bridge until native cardiac circulation's restored. What we see when we put someone who's in refractory arrest on ECMO is about 95% of the patients have return of native circulation in the first 3 hours after they're on ECMO. And that's because we restore their coronary perfusion pressure, their oxygen delivery. And this can be done quickly. I've been in the ECMO receiving rooms in Japan and seen them go in 8 minutes from arrival to functional ECMO. So in expert hands, someone can be cannulated quickly, and then you can get circulation restored. So the holy grail is miniature equipment that's portable, rapid venous and arterial cannulation, get them on pump, get return of spontaneous circulation at some point in time while you fix the cause of arrest, and then treat them with post-cardiac arrest care and neuroprognostication. And just to wrap up, I'll show you a couple recent U.S. experiences with this. So in San Diego, Joe Galazzo and Zach Shiner, they're both emergency physicians, not critical care trained, but interested in cardiac arrest. They got trained both by doing human cannulation and by doing animal models of cannulation and simulation with the CT surgeons. And then they started this ECMO protocol there. So refractory VF, just like our patient, comes into the ED, and then what they would do is put in a femoral arterial and venous single lumen cannula, continue CPR, and then if the person didn't get return of spontaneous circulation and remained a candidate for ECMO, CT surgery would come down, dilate, put in the ECMO cannula, and start ECMO. And they reported on the first 18 patients, 8 of whom actually got cannulated, got ECMO started, and admitted to the hospital. And 5 of those 8 were discharged neurologically intact. Now they've modified this program, so all of the 3 steps are done by the ED physicians, and CT surgery is only called when they say, hey, we just put someone on ECMO, they're going to the cath lab, then they're gonna come to your unit. So that's when CT surgery gets involved in these patients. They all go to the cath lab afterwards. They've done another 20 or so patients, and their survival's right around 50% for those who are cannulated and admitted to the hospital. This is the work we did at Penn with CT surgery and cardiology. These patients were all cannulated by CT surgery in the emergency department. And we had a whole protocol of who should be included. It was refractory arrest, but we moved outside of that protocol quite a bit. And you can see the mean time to cannulation's pretty long, 77 minutes. The general thought is that someone should be on functional ECMO in 45 to 60 minutes after collapse, and we were out in the 77-minute range. 4 out of 26 patients survived, 3/4 of them neurologically intact. We had a flow diagram to try and control the chaos of this, and I think a lot of the problems we had was just with the CT surgeons who are expert at what they're doing, but they're leaving the world they're comfortable in and coming to a very chaotic environment and trying to do the cannulation. To control that, we actually did some novel things like they did in San Diego, where we said, okay, the emergency physicians will put in the wires in a single lumen catheter, and we actually had cases where we did that, and then the CT fellow would come down and say, I don't know what you're talking about, and just cannulate on the other side, because they didn't sort of buy into what we had done, even though Mike Acker, who's the head of CT surgery, approved the whole thing. So there's all these hurdles that go on with this kind of process. This is the CHEER trial. So this is Stephen Bernard's group over in Melbourne, same guy who did one of the first hypothermia trials. And they got a lot of experience, the medical critical care doctors, with cannulation for ECMO during the swine flu epidemic. And they sort of led their hold charge for ECPR. So mechanical CPR, hypothermia, ECMO, and early reperfusion. And this was 26 patients, 11 out of hospital, 15 in hospital. You can see they're getting into a much better time to functional ECMO, 56 minutes, on there for 2 days, and then look at their survival, 56% survival, all CPC1, so back to baseline mental status, and 56% of these patients with refractory arrest. And what they decided was that if you're in a program, in a city with a dedicated ECMO program where you have experts who are used to doing this, that this can be a functional thing. This is the latest thing that was published. Dimitri Yiannopoulos is an interventional cardiologist at the University of Minnesota, and they've built, very similar to what I showed you in Japan, an ECMO program that starts in the pre-hospital setting. So they identify refractory VF in the pre-hospital setting. If it's during the day, there's a direct call to the cath lab attending from EMS saying, we have a patient in refractory VF, would come into the cath lab. They don't even stop in the ED. They go right past the ED to the cath lab, and they meet them there, and they make a decision. I'm gonna cath them while they're on a Lucas, or I'm gonna put them on ECMO and then cath them. And they make that decision based on the transport time, the quality of the VF, and a few other things that they put into the equation. If it's at night, they stop in the ED for continued conventional CPR until the cath team gets there, and then they cath them in the ED. The next thing they're working on is the ED physicians would put them on ECMO while the cath team's coming in, so that you can continue with this. Be that as it may, they do ECMO, angiography, PCI. They transported 27 patients, 18 inclusion criteria. They put 83% of them on ECMO. They all get angiography, but 67% of them actually get a coronary intervention. Tells you how much of refractory VF is from a coronary cause. And look at their survival, 55% survival to discharge. 9 out of 10 of those patients neurologically intact. These are patients who just would have gone to the ED and got ongoing CPR and then most likely pronounced dead. Your chances of surviving when you're 30 minutes into a VF arrest is very low. I think most people would agree it's under 10%. Their historic data suggested they had 8% survival in this population before they started this approach to these patients. So hyper-aggressive management strategy leading to much more survival after cardiac arrest. So just to wrap up sort of everything we've talked about, optimal CPR and post-cardiac arrest care is a bundle of care. And I would argue that 10 years from now, if this all moves the way it should, we'll be doing goal-directed CPR, that at cardiac arrest receiving hospitals, if we go to regionalization of cardiac arrest care, the approach in the emergency department will be to put in A lines and venous lines when the person hits the emergency department and use those to guide resuscitation. It's going to be hypothermia or some kind of temperature management, plus lots of other things. I think the hemodynamics are very important. It doesn't matter whether you're measuring CVP or SCVO2, it matters whether you understand the hemodynamics in those patients. Neuroprognostication is key. One of the things that hypothermia did is it stopped us from withdrawing care too soon. And that's one of the most important things it do. And I think ECMO is the future of this. A lot of this is avoidance of nihilism, and then the details need to be elucidated. When we get really portable equipment, which we really already have, this is in Regensburg, Germany. They have, the EMS has an Audi. I would like this Audi. And it's an ECMO Audi. When they have a witnessed ventricular fibrillation arrest, the EMS goes, but an anesthesia critical care physician goes in this Audi with all the ECMO equipment they need, and they get to the scene, and if it's 15 minutes post-collapse and the person's still in VF and they don't have return of spontaneous circulation, they cannulate the patient in the patient's living room, in the restaurant, out in the square, and then the EMS takes them back to the hospital and they treat them from there. They're doing the same thing in Paris. Lionel Lamhut's group there. They go out for all the refractory arrests. There's this famous picture of them cannulating a patient in the main gallery of the Louvre and transporting that patient back to the hospital. I'm not suggesting that this is cost effective necessarily, but they actually make financial arguments about how it is cost effective. It shows you what the frontiers of post-arrest care can be. And if we did all of this stuff, I think 50% survival after cardiac arrest is not unreasonable, at least for the subset of arrests that are witnessed and shockable, and probably